But today, as for the act of voting itself, I urge voting rights groups in this country to begin to redouble their efforts now to register and educate voters. And in June should be a month of action on Capitol Hill. I hear all the folks on TV saying, why doesn't Biden get this done? Well, because Biden only has a majority of effectively 4 votes in the House and a tie in the Senate, with 2 members of the Senate who vote more with my Republican friends. But we're not giving up. Earlier this year, the House of Representatives passed For the People Act to protect our democracy. The Senate will take it up later this month, and I'm going to fight like heck with every tool at my disposal for its passage. The House is also working on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is critical to providing new legal tools to combat the new assault on the right to vote. To signify the importance of our efforts, today I'm asking Vice President Harris to help these efforts and lead them among her many other responsibilities. With her leadership and your support, we're going to overcome again, I promise you, but it's going to take a hell of a lot of work.
When Joe Biden, the guy whose entire identity is predicated on unity and bipartisanship, when even he acknowledges that certain senators are making enacting the Democratic agenda difficult, that's when it might be time for Joe Manchin and Sinema to rethink their priorities. And granted, while he didn't use their names, it's clear who he was referring to. After all, Biden was referencing voting rights, and what's needed to actually pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, is lowering that threshold from 60 votes to a simple majority, which is done by eliminating or reforming the filibuster, or even creating a rule that the filibuster won't apply to election legislation. Because remember, Democrats are in charge of the Senate. They get to make the rules. And if any rule should be made, it's that legislation protecting the integrity of our elections shouldn't have to pass some insurmountable hurdle. And when I say election integrity, I mean actual election integrity, not the so-called election security that Republicans use to dress up voter suppression bills. Now, for clarification here, when Biden said there were 2 senators who vote more with Republicans, it wasn't clear whether he meant that they vote more with Republicans than they vote with Democrats, or just in general, that they vote more with Republicans than other Democrats do, that they vote more with Republicans than they should. If he meant the former, in fairness, Biden would be wrong. Manchin and Sinema overwhelmingly do vote with Democrats. But if he meant the latter, that they vote more with Republicans than other Democrats do, Biden was right. Manchin and Sinema do tend to vote with Republicans. And just to put things into perspective for a moment here, and I'll try to have some nuance despite this political environment being adamantly opposed to nuance, this isn't to suggest that having Manchin and Sinema is the same thing as having Republicans, because it's thanks to their elections that Democrats have the majority, that we chair the committees, and that we passed crucial, life-saving, billion-dollar legislation like the American Rescue Plan. Legislation that wouldn't have gone anywhere without every last member of this party. However, with that said, the issue of H.R. 1 trumps every other issue facing us right now. Our other legislative priorities are important, but H.R. 1, the For the People Act, is existential. And so the frustration by Biden is warranted, because if we don't pass H.R. 1, it won't matter what else we try to do, because we'll be legislated out of government. Our stance on women's reproductive health and climate change and a minimum wage won't matter, because we won't have any representation to even act on it. And so until Manchin and Sinema change their position on the filibuster, they're effectively siding with Republicans as they seek to continue gerrymandering Democrats out of government and suppressing brown and black voters at the ballot box, and giving themselves the right to replace election officials with party loyalists who will do the bidding that Trump wanted them to do in 2020. And so if you're wondering whether the frustration with Manchin and Sinema is warranted, it clearly is. Biden also announced that Vice President Kamala Harris will take charge of this administration's efforts to pass H.R. 1 and the Voting Rights Act, meaning that he clearly has a vested interest in making sure this gets done, as opposed to just being one of the number of other issues that he'll comment on without delegating someone specifically to solve it. And if Kamala Harris knows that she's responsible for this passing, hopefully that'll mean that she'll feel the pressure to make sure that it gets done. So look, at the end of the day, I get that Joe Manchin and Sinema are conservative Democrats. They come from conservative states, they were elected, that's their prerogative. But passing H.R. 1 isn't the same as Medicare for all, as much as I think that they should also pass Medicare for all. Passing H.R. 1 is essential if those very senators want to protect their own jobs. This isn't only existential for the party, it's existential for them. Sinema is from a state that itself has introduced voter suppression legislation. Arizona just made headlines for moving to strip the Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, of her powers to litigate election matters, giving them instead to the Republican Attorney General, which I discussed with her during an interview this week. A bill's now passed the state House and Senate Appropriations Committee that would strip you of your election powers for committing the crime of criticizing the audit that we were just referring to. So what exactly would this bill do, and what are you doing to fight back?
So I want to make it clear, this bill is nothing more than political retaliation at me and my office for doing the job that the Arizona voters elected me to do, being good at that job. And it'll basically overturn the will of the voters, if they're successful. What they're doing is removing a constitutional duty of my office of defending of Arizona election laws and taking it and giving it to the Attorney General. So how that plays out, what that means is if somebody decides to file a suit over an election law, my office will still be the named defendant and won't have any ability to act as a defendant in court and have any say over the matter in court. And this is really problematic in many ways. I have had public conflicts with the Attorney General because I've tried to focus on what's best for voters of Arizona, and he's defended cases based on his partisan political agenda. And so that's really what this comes down to. This is unconstitutional. The duties prescribed to my office in this regard are in the state's constitution, and the legislature does not have the authority to overturn the Constitution. And so, if this does end up passing, we will go to court over it.
Also, this bill would end after 2022, so it literally just targets you. Nothing here is based in any semblance of governing principles. It is just a personal attack against someone who isn't deemed sufficiently loyal to this cause of defending the big lie.
Well, and I'll just, this didn't start with the 2020 election. It started with me being a Democrat and having the audacity to win a statewide race in Arizona.
So for the senator from Arizona to oppose the legislation that would protect her own election seems too misguided to even begin to comprehend. So good on Joe Biden for calling these senators out, and hopefully he, the vice president, their Democratic colleagues, and the voters and constituents continue to put pressure on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, because this is our shot. This is our chance to either protect our democracy and keep this fragile experiment going, or allow Republicans to rig the game in their favor. We can do one or the other, but we can't do both. The faster these Democratic holdouts realize that, the better. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.